Assalamu alaikum, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters. Welcome back to another episode of ReMAStered. And we're here and we're talking about college. It's back to school season, people getting ready. I know school starts for some people in I know here in the Midwest is in 2 weeks, I think, for some schools, right? And then high
hmm
school and
hmm
stuff, and the elementary kids have already started. But we talking about the older people and the real issues, the real topics. But we're joined by a wonderful guest. We have Sister Dua Hagag. I have to pronounce the two G's instead of the instead of ja. It's ga because Masri, right? Sister Dua, assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the show.
Wa alaikum assalam. Thanks for having me. Jazakallah khairan.
Just to read quickly about Sister Dua, she is a LPC and is a community educator with the Family and Youth Institute. FYI, FYI, she holds a master's degree in counseling with a dual certificate in school and community counseling. She currently works in a private practice as a child, adolescent, and family therapist at Silent Sunlight Counseling. Her interests include group play and art therapy. And she's also been a community organizer for more than 15 years. Her passion is working with parents, mentors, and schools to create safe, affirming spaces for youth to discover, establish their identity. She actively mentors youth and families through Muslim American society. So this is just a quick introduction. I feel great always talking to the guests because you guys have like credentials of things like you guys have done, right? And I feel like, man, I gotta get my resume up, get some stuff. But Sis Dua, real quick, if you just wanted to, say add anything else, just do some more introduction of who you are and what you do, and where you're from, also.
I live in Michigan, Greater Flint. Uh, I love working with youth. I work through the youth through my private practice, but also through the local mosque and through Mass. Um, and I am a heart to heart person, so I like the heart talk. I'm not really the kind of person that does the shallow talk. I guess us introverts are like that. So I'm ready to have the heart conversations.
That's it's a lot of I feel pressure. It's funny. I get along with introverts a lot because I'm like an extrovert, right? And
Mhm.
they always say like introverts have that one like really loudmouth extrovert that adopts them and they become friends. So that's what it kind of feels like. So inshallah, we have that.
Yeah,
But you know,
inshallah.
we're talking about a topic that's really it's important. It's especially in the times we live in, it's like a really changing point for a lot of people in terms of like their life, the direction it goes, the influence, the trajectory, how I could take it off course. It's a lot of things, right? Dealing with college, right? You have thousands and thousands of universities all across the United States, private, public, 4-year community college, all kinds of things, right? So these institutions were typically meant for people to go learn a skill, a trade, or something, get certified in, and then go out, get a job, and improve their lives, and get married, and get a family, and live the American dream, quote unquote, get a house, or
Yeah,
all these
yeah.
other things. Well, now it's like that, but institutions now you can say they have their flaws, or we see the flaws now more than ever. Sis Dua, could you just talk about historically what was like college meant for, really, like at least in the Western sense in this society?
So I guess theoretically it's a place where you got to learn your trade and then you can go out in the real world. But realistically speaking, it's also a very social scene, right? People go to colleges to make new friendships, to broaden their friendships. Lots of people, they want to leave their home environments and they want to find something new to broaden their horizons. So there's a very big social part to joining the college scene. And that could be a good thing or a bad thing. Really depending on what your value system is and what you have, like what your basics are when you go in there. And in any environment, in any situation that you're going in, you got to have a set of core values to be able to broaden and really branch out. And that those roots have to be strong to be able to branch out. And so that's how I think of the college scene. The college scene, yes, you are coming in to learn your trade, but you're also getting to know a little bit more about yourself through the relationships that you discover and you establish in the college scene.
I think that's one part that's really underrated that doesn't get talked about in terms of like high school, right? High school, they prep you do like, for lack of a better thing, I don't want to say stupid stuff, but like ACTs, SATs, like that stuff, it matters, but your employers never ask you about that stuff, right? But like how
Yeah.
to socially interact with people once you get on the campus, and how to go about the right means of finding the right group to be with and things of that nature. And so so you say like core principles people should have. If we were to like put that inside of like high schools or middle schools, elementary, like how would that look like? How would like what are some of those key attributes somebody should have and principles as a Muslim when you going into college?
So I'd like to take a step back because I want to comment on something that you said about the high schools. A lot of the high schools that people go through, it's kind of like there's all these things you need to do to get out the door, right? And
Hmm.
it's a very structured, very like rule based. You got to take this exam, you got to take these coursework, you've got to have benchmarks, all of those things.
Exactly.
and and young people, this is kind of like the core of where, in their human development, in their brain development, even to really figure out who they are, what are their values, what do they represent. And it's the time of their life where they ask themselves the question, do I want to turn out how my family is, or do I want to be different from my parents are, my family, my siblings, the people that are around me, and how am I going to be different? And I think a really missing key point that we don't find in a lot of these high schools, which is before college, right, is this discovery piece, really, really giving people the opportunity to figure out who they are. And so when they go on to college, that's kind of like the gate is open and people are like, yes, let's figure this part out, right? Um,
Hmm.
but going back to your initial, question about core values, I mean, we have the specific core values that Islam kind of gives us in terms of a framework. But as human beings in general, there are some core values that we should be trying to incorporate and discover in our lives. Things like creativity and innovation,
Hmm.
things like compassion, spirituality, love, connection, purpose, contributing to the community, all of those things. And I think those are all different categories that we have to really look into what part of my life and my lifestyle, and what I'm doing in my everyday, living contributes to each of those categories. That's a big question we have to ask ourselves.
So, question. Let's rewind back because there's two things you touched on I want to ask about. The first is
Mhm.
like self discovery,
Mhm.
But before we
Mhm.
get to self discovery, because actually that may be something bigger, can you
Mhm.
please just like solidify some of those concepts, right? Because sometimes we'll mention things like spirituality, creativity, innovation, but what do those look like tangibly? Can you give examples of how somebody maybe can make those realities versus, I feel sometimes like we as youth, we may get confused hearing these things. It's like, okay, what does that look like? How do I, is it like
Absolutely.
this? Is it like that?
Absolutely. So let's start with spirituality, because that's a very vague term that a lot of people like to use nowadays, right? So, spirituality is basically this idea that there is a higher power, that there is Allah there, there's God there to watch over us, to take care of us, that everything happens for a reason, right? And there's some sense of safety as human beings when we feel like there is a higher power who's created us and knows what's best for us. It's kind of like a safety net for everything that happens, because
Mhm.
life is going to have those obstacles. It always will. The Quran tells us, that you're not going to be a believer unless you're tested. And so this idea and this concept that there is a higher power that takes care of me, that knows what's best for me, and I have to take time in my everyday life to connect with that higher power and ask that higher power for guidance, is a really important concept and idea that we have to incorporate into our daily living. When it comes to things like creativity, we're just wired as human beings. We're different than every other creature on the earth. The way that we're wired is that we're wired to create new things. It's just that we love to innovate. And when we don't spend time doing those things, we feel bored. We feel there's something off, right? And we know that Allah is beautiful and He loves beauty. So if we can change something to become more beautiful or change something to become better, it gives us a high. It gives us a high. It makes us feel better about our everyday living. And other things like compassion and contribution. We need to feeling that we're not just living here for our own selves, but helping other people. And some people think that when we help others, it's for those people, but it really is for our own mental health. When we're helping others and we're compassionate to other, we feel better about who we are as people. Um, so compassion, creativity, spirituality, love and connection. One of the really biggest,
Mm.
issues that a lot of young people face, especially during the pandemic, is this feeling of loneliness and isolation. Um, because as young people, part of our development in figuring out our identity and who we are is related directly to the meaningful connections that we make with other human beings. And so because we're tribal creatures, that's how we are as human beings. We have to feel like we belong to a community, to a group. And the college scene, if that's a big part of it. The clubs, the MSAs, the group of friends that we feel that we align in terms of values or hobbies or interests. Those are really important for us to feel happy and healthy as young people.
It's interesting that you mentioned that because it kind of sounds like it's the flip, right? It sounds like high school, we're on this trajectory to where they force it to where, okay, you have to do this, you have to do that, you have to do this, you have to do that. And then when you get to college, you're like, oh, what's this? Oh, what's that? Subhanallah, what's this? What's that? And you get like all wide eyed, right? And like your
Yeah.
Muslim friends, you may see them be like, yeah, I know you guys, I love you guys, but you guys stay over there. Like, let me push you guys to the side and discover
Yeah.
like what's actually on this campus. So, you saying that it makes sense, that we should flip it, right? It should be that maybe in high school that we do more discovery, and then in college you'll be more solidified on, okay, this is what you need to do, stay on this track, continue, keep going forward. But it seems like the society we live in does the flip because I don't know, there's just something interesting, I
Yeah,
really don't know.
and I'm telling you, a lot of the clients that I see that are Muslim, they're because everybody has to go through some kind of identity formation in their lifetime, right?
Hmm.
For a lot of the Muslim young people, it's shifted. It's like, it's supposed to be during the teenage years, but a lot of times they're figuring out themselves in their 20s a lot later because of for whatever reason. Maybe it's because their school, maybe because of really strict rules where they were kind of like in a bubble, where they weren't really
Hmm.
able to explore and really find themselves. And this is what I tell parents all the time: you have to let your young person explore and make those mistakes, of course, within a framework, some threshold there, but make those mistakes to really discover who they are, because otherwise they're eventually going to have to go through that process, right? And it's nice to have the people around you who can give you those handlebars or those handrails, right? Where they're giving you that coaching and that advice, and while you're going through it, instead of waiting when you're kind of feeling like you're on your own and you don't have that kind of mentorship.
And one thing that emphasizes that point even more is when I think about, I grew up in Michigan, shout out Michigan. So that's one reason I had to shout out Michigan. But, growing up in Michigan, I realized the difference between some of the children and students who went further than others in terms of like what they did with careers, in terms of school and things of that nature, was the level of exposure that they had as children, right? Some people never left the neighborhood. They just stayed there. They never went out. They never seen different things. Whereas others got to see different things, try different programs. So then when it came time for their adult lives, it was easier to make those steps towards those things and they weren't as scary, right? Because I think
Absolutely.
if you could speak to that point, just speaking about the anxiety of self-discovery and experimentation of trying new things.
Yeah. It's scary trying to figure out who you are. It doesn't matter how old you are. It's scary because as we're just wired to be in our comfort zones, and when we step out of our comfort zones to kind of figure out what is it that I do like or I do want, there's a part of us that screams, no, 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 just stay the same, stay in the same patterns. And especially if you've watched your family or your neighborhood or whatever the people around you are going through a certain trajectory, the moment you step out of that, it's anxiety inducing for sure. And that's where the mentorship comes in, the mentorship where you have someone that can say, no, you can do it. A good friend or a good mentor, an older mentor that can say, no, I have faith in you. I know you can.
Mhm.
And it doesn't necessarily only have to be from people, but from even our Islamic framework, to give
Mhm.
us those that support, that kind of support that we need when we're going through those. But I agree with you. Sometimes, I wish there were things like more apprenticeships, or
Mhm.
opportunities for people to explore what it
Or
is they
trips
like
or
to do.
things of that nature.
Yeah, yeah, we kind of really went away from that, and I feel like that's really important for young people to have.
And with this whole more on the like self-discovery tip, one thing that I want to like talk about and see if we can like dig into is now self-discovery sometimes seems like, I don't know, in my head now I'm seeming like, all right, is that like a loaded term now, right? Because a
Oh
lot of the
yeah.
time self-discovery is connected to LGBTQ or uh, uh, being free in your experimentation of drugs and things of that nature, right? Now,
Hmm.
I'm not I'm not defending that stuff. I'm not dissing that stuff. I'm just saying that, okay, let's say that is a form of self-discovery, right? We can't limit the definition just to that. So how do we open up the minds of youth to where they don't think that's the only thing that is synonymous with self-discovery and exploring and trying out different things?
I'm glad you brought that up, because I think a lot of young people, when they think about identity formation, they feel like there aren't any limitations whatsoever, right?
Mm,
But I think that's where we go back to this safety net piece, is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts for us a framework, a specific framework of what is good for us as human beings. And we may not fully understand it. We may never fully understand it. But that's where this concept of roots, what we really need to work on is our love and trust of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That this idea that Allah knows what's best for us, He cares for us. And if I know that this, pathway of Islam is true and that Allah does care for us, let's take a deep look at what the framework is in terms of what is good for us, and then explore within that framework. Now, I'm not going to sit here and pretend like people don't explore in ways that might not be healthy, right? It happens, and it's a part of the growth, of the human experience. Um, but what is oftentimes missing are the really deep conversations, open conversations that we have to have with our young people. So, I'm sure many people have heard of the young man who came to the Prophet Muhammad SAW and said,
awesome.
can you give me permission to commit zina? Right?
Mhm,
And zina, we can't
mhm,
do adultery in Islam, but the conversation wasn't shunned by the Prophet Muhammad SAW. The conversation was happening. He was talking with him, right? And there were so many topics of that nature that were never really shut down. And I think that's where the exploration piece is. It's not about the thinking and the questioning and the conversations and even the dabbling in some of those things sometimes. It's not about that. It's about having the spaces that are safe enough for young people to have those really important conversations, but understand how they can make those connections with the Islamic understanding and the Islamic framework.
no, definitely. Now, with question, like, so as we proceed, what are your therapist, your counselor, so you deal with people on the very like their emotional level and the most sincere, at least if they try to be sincere. Big word of advice, please be honest with your therapist because they can only give you the right advice if you're being honest about what you're going through. So
Absolutely.
I see the joke. A lady was like, I lied to my therapist for years and she thought everything was fine. But so please don't lie to
We're
your
not
therapist.
mind readers. We're not mind readers.
Yeah. But with therapy and college students, what are some of the reoccurring themes you see that people come and they talk to you about and they express like, I'm suffering through this, I'm struggling with this? What are like some things you see often?
So surprisingly, because a lot of people may not think this or assume otherwise, a lot of the young people, the young guys that I see, uh, at least many of them felt like when they went off to college, they could just do anything, right?
Yeah.
And they would try all kinds of things. And we're talking about everything,
Yeah.
right? Drugs, premarital sex,
Yeah.
I mean, everything, right?
Yeah.
And then it doesn't feel so good.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, I thought it was going to feel amazing. I thought my life was going to be, perfect. I held it together when I was with my family and, when I was a part of the mosque. And now that I'm kind of, quote unquote free, and I've tried everything, I'm not happy. I'm still not happy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like they have this existential crisis. They ask themselves, okay, well, what is it that I do want? If this is something that I'm trying and I'm still not happy and I'm still not content,
Mm-hmm.
what is it that I do want? And a lot of them, when they come to see me, that's a question they ask themselves, is like, I kind of feel like I want to go back to this Dean thing and I want to go back to, like, the values, but I
Right.
don't know where to start because
Mm-hmm.
everything that I've associated with Dean and everything that I've associated with religion, I don't have a very good feeling about that either, but I know that where the path that I'm taking doesn't feel so good.
Mm-hmm.
So I know that I get that a lot, oftentimes from Muslim kids. Surprisingly, both boys and both sisters and brothers, but a lot from the brothers, to be honest. Another thing is anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
Really, really, for a lot of young people, they're just anxious. They're anxious. They feel. I would say for sisters, a little bit more than the brothers. There's like this performance piece, right? For
Mm-hmm.
many different reasons. Um, I have to prove, for very traditional families, I have to prove that as a woman, I can excel and I can do well. You know,
Mm-hmm.
um, there's this piece of, I have to make it out there because I'm a Muslim and I'm visibly Muslim, as
Mm-hmm.
so I have to make sure that people see me in a really positive light, or people see me as excellent in what I do. And while that's a really good dawah piece, it is a lot of pressure, because
Mm-hmm.
you're feeling, with, especially with all the Islamophobia, and there a lot of these sisters that are visibly Muslim, they feel like it's their responsibility to make sure that they show the world that Islam is beautiful. They show the world that Islam is perfect and they're perfect and there's nothing going on with them, right? And they have to put on that mask of being smiling all the time. And even if they're having a bad day, they can't show that part. And so putting on a mask every day, all the time, because otherwise people are going to think of you as, the terrorist or the bad Muslim, right? Is exhausting. It's
Mm-hmm.
extremely exhausting. Um, so that's kind of in a nutshell a lot of what I see with the Muslim youth when they go off to college.
One thing that's the underlying theme that kind of hit me is like the theme of like perfection, right? And the last episode I actually referenced this book, if I'm not mistaken, by is Dr. Malik Badri. He was Allah yarhamu. He was it's a book by Zaid al-Belki. I forget. It's a Islamic
Mm,
cognitive guy from like the 7th century, cognitive guy,
mm,
scientist. But he was writing about, and he said in the book, if I'm not mistaken, anxiety seems to be the root of all the mental troubles that people go through, right? And
mm.
it just makes me think. Those brothers, they say, I want to try this Deen thing, but I don't know where to start. The sisters say I have to make Islam look like it's perfect. And it's almost like once they get that anxiety after going through whatever, the waswas of the shaitan is, oh, you're not perfect. Just forget it. This isn't perfect.
Yeah.
Just don't. Why go back to Dean? Because speaking from like a personal anecdote relating to the guys, I
Mm,
know that
mm,
one thing I would definitely say is when you get to college as a young man, right? Of course, people don't know if you're Muslim. If they see you, they think you're just whoever, right? But
mhm.
that thing of freedom it's just ridiculous how much freedom you have and how much it's power, right? And if you've never
And a
had
lot
that
of the guys
before,
can and a
no,
lot
go
of the
ahead.
guys can get away with it because
Yeah,
they're a lot of them aren't visibly Muslim, right? So,
and it's not like, oh, if you get caught leaving this dorm, you're a
mhm,
hijabi, or you take off your hijab and somebody sees you, hey, don't you wear that thing, right? Like, no,
mhm,
it's like you do that. But when you go through all of that and then it's like it's time to come back, it's this feeling of like disgust and almost shame and
Mhm.
like kind of like depression. And not even kind of, it's
Yeah.
definitely depression, right? Because it's thinking like, man, like this thing that was perfect to me, I was a part of this perfect fold, but now I've messed up and now I'm out of it,
Yeah.
right? I can't get back in, right? And then the same with the sisters, where it's like I have to stay perfect or else I'll never get back, right? Oh,
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
I mess up, because I know sisters who have, of course, made mistakes, right? And it's done a lot of, I don't want to say damage to use that word, right? Because it's a heavy word, but it had a lot of impact on them,
You
right?
got cut off for
And
a
it was tough for them
second.
to come back. So, you know, that whole thing of perfection and like
Mhm.
anxiety is really, it seems to be an underlying theme. You know, how do we combat something like that, right? How do I say, all right, like, of course, one way, of course, it would be learning like the Sirah and learning stories of the companions and really thinking of that in like true context, right? Like, oh, these people had mistakes, they had issues, but what other ways can we combat that battling that perfection and saying like, I'm a Muslim, all right, I made a mistake, astaghfirullah, make tawbah, get back to praying to rakat and just keep
Yeah.
it moving.
Yeah. You know, خير الخطائين التوابون, meaning the best of you are those that Allah
Mm,
sees are the ones who make mistakes and they repent. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala isn't expecting us, and this is what I remind my clients all the time. He's not expecting us to be perfect. Only Allah is perfect. He knows we're gonna make mistakes. And he just and sometimes those are the mistakes that bring us closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because you don't reach out to Allah hard unless you fall hard, right? You have to
mm-hmm,
you have to make those mistakes. And so and it goes back again to our relationship, how we view Allah. Unfortunately, just from a psychological perspective, how we view Allah is related to the authority figures that we had as children growing up.
mm,
So if you had authority figures when you were younger that were strict and harsh and, didn't allow you to make those mistakes, then oftentimes that's how we associate our creator.
mm.
When, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, repeated over and over and over again in the beginning of every surah, right? So I think we have to kind of flip that mindset of that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is there for us, and to surround ourselves with the people that remind us of that really hold space. If you really look at the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the seerah, the way that he helped people to understand God and to understand Allah is not through preaching and saying, this is what Allah is, one, two, three, four, five. It's through the relationships that he had with people, with the things that they would do wrong, that that the Prophet ﷺ would comfort them, connect with them, and then they said they would never touch that again because they felt so loved by the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And there's story after story after story in the seerah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, people making mistakes and him not really reprimanding them in a way that
Mm.
would shame them, but allowing them, leaving that gate open, which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala always leaves for us. And that's a psychological way to deal with it, is to give people hope. People need to feel like there's hope in the mistakes that they make and the journey that they take.
You know, that reminds me of a quote. If this, what's the guy's name? I want to say, let me look it up really quick. But the quote was
Mhm,
along the lines. He was on a show and he was speaking about how the reason a lot of companies want to monetize what we do, especially our attention, is the greatest thing that we have in our society is human and social interaction, right?
mhm,
Like
mhm.
human and social interaction is everything. Like they know, okay, when Sis Dua is going to the store and she sees uh, Sis Iman, oh, they talk right there. Okay, let's see if we can put something there before they talk to make them want to buy something. Like, but that social interaction, right? And the way the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam he treated the companions and people, he gave the greatest of value to those people, right? And because of that, when they're around them, that's why they felt that inspiration. And when they're around them, even though things may be bad, they feel like, all right, I messed up on things, but the way this guy reminds me, right? And I think that's super important for us to do, cultivating the way we interact with our society. But you know, smartphones kind of make that a little bit harder,
Yeah, I mean, the Prophet ﷺ, he said, if you love a brother, tell him that you love him.
right?
I mean, it seems like such an insignificant thing, but it's such a powerful practice that if you love someone, tell them, let them know it, show it to them, right? And that's how we build bonds with one another. That's how we connect with one another. And when we hold space for one another that way, that's how we lift each other up. Yeah, okay, I'm going through this struggle too with the deans, because sometimes what happens is we live in these silos. We think we're the only ones dealing with this issue or this problem or anxiety or whatever it is. But
mm,
when you're with a group, I do a lot of parent groups and parent workshops, and sometimes parents, they're like, I'm really struggling with my kids, and they think they're the only ones.
mm.
And when they're sitting with a whole group of other parents, they're like, oh my gosh, I'm going through the same thing. Me too, me too. It feels that community, surrounding that community support makes you feel like, okay, I can do this. We can talk about this together.
Yeah, it definitely makes you feel not alone. And people, I think that's one reason why the concept of Jama is really emphasized, right? When people,
Mhm.
not that people are necessarily cowards, I don't want to use a word like that, but people are less likely to do things on alone because that fear, right? You don't know the fear of the unknown, right? But as a group,
Mhm.
you feel more confident moving forward. Okay. Or if you have even just one person, hey, let's try this thing. You sure? Yeah. Okay. Let's
Yeah,
try it. We'll do it. Right.
yeah,
Um.
yeah.
So no,
I
go ahead.
think I think the caveat with that though is that sometimes people feel like they always have to be a part of a group no matter what.
No, exactly.
Even if
Yeah, that's
that
true.
group even if that group is detrimental to their soul or who they want to really be, right? And so the flip side of that is, the Prophet ﷺ, he says, Tuba lil ghuraba, glad tidings to the strangers.
Hmm.
No matter what you do, you're going to feel like a stranger.
Hmm.
You're going to feel like a stranger. And so you need to find those fellow strangers that you can hang out with and have those conversations with, because in the general mainstream stream college scene, it's going to be hard to fit in. So even these young people that go and they feel like, I can get away with not being visibly Muslim, I can do all of these things and it's not going to be a big deal. The Prophet ﷺ, he teaches us that sin is the thing that causes friction in your heart. And so even if you're on the outside doing all of these things, if you're not feeling it, it's going to come back to you. You're going to feel like
Hmm.
something doesn't feel right. And that's a lot of the clients that I see. That's what they tell me. They say, I just don't feel good. I don't feel
SubhanAllah.
right. Subhanallah. And that's the fitra of the human being. The fitra, we don't want to reach a point where our hearts are so hardened because we've kind of just gone through that. We kind of ignore that feeling and we keep going, keep going. We ignore that feeling. And then that friction isn't as detectable anymore.
Yeah. You know, one thing I will say, this is about to sound super cliche. I know when they cut it and they put it
Hmm.
out there, they'll say, ah, yeah, we've heard this a million times. But one thing I would say that's definitely key is habits, right? Habits are key, especially if you're trying to develop and build yourself. And I think the one thing did you notice, because I want to go into talking about bad friends and bad influences, right? At least in the college scene,
Hmm.
is the
Hmm.
first thing that the go with people once they get to school is the salah, right? Like once they really get on the deep end, right? They really go on the
Yeah.
deep end, they lose the
Yeah.
salah. And I think if you don't keep anything, I'm not saying don't say, oh, this guy on this podcast told me to like not read Quran, not go to Jumu'ah, anything. No. But if you do abandon everything, at least keep the salah, right? And the reason why, A, it gives you everything is in the salah, right? Adhkar, Quran, remembrance of Allah, remembering to align yourself, having tawakkul in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But it's also a habit. It's something that it grounds you, right? Because whatever you're doing, it always brings you back and you remember and you're like, okay, let me remember that. Because I know me personally, right? And other people I knew, that was one of the first things to go with people, or they didn't have it at all, right? Because we have
Hmm.
some people
Hmm.
who, before they got to college, they weren't solid with praying, right?
Yeah.
So then
Yeah.
what happens is, and this is a pattern I've noticed, right? When it's time, let's say it's time to praise Allah, we all hang in with a group of people. So what will happen is you meet a group of people at school, they're really cool. Okay, you guys are awesome. They're not bad, nothing wrong.
Hmm.
Then what happens
Hmm.
is they're like, oh, come hang out with us one day. Okay, so you go to hang
Hmm.
out. It's around like 8:30, around this time, like 8:30, 8:40, 8:50.
Hmm.
Then they're like,
Hmm.
hey, how's everything? It's good, okay. Yeah, so you wanna we about to you're thinking to yourself, oh, it's time to praise Allah. Oh man, I should pray. But I'm here with all these people. I don't want to just pray around them. It's gonna be awkward. It's gonna be weird. you know.
Mhm.
But what happens is during that time, I feel when that anxiety comes, that's when the waswas of the shaitan comes. Like, oh yeah, now is
Yeah.
when I go in. Hey, don't pray around these people. It's awkward. It's weird. And
Mhm.
then to make
Mhm.
matters even more complex, let's say during that time, they're like, hey man, it's 9 o'clock. 9 o'clock around. That's when people get ready to go out. They're like, hey, we're about to drink a beer or have some drinks. You want to drink? And it's like,
Mhm.
oh, I gotta tell them I don't drink. Okay,
Mhm.
hey guys, I don't drink. And then they're like, oh, you don't drink? And then it becomes awkward. And then eventually over time, the shaitan, he keeps coming during that anxiety, those anxiety moments,
Mhm.
anxious moments,
Mhm.
puts that waswas, and eventually it breaks you down. So how do we navigate making the right decision in those moments and avoiding that waswas, and then avoiding just navigating bad influences of people who may not necessarily be bad, but just what they engage in may not be something you engage in?
Yeah. So I like what you said at the beginning. You have to have a full cup. If you're on empty, then it's easy for you to kind of go astray. So when I say full cup, before you even are a part of that 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock scene, there's got to
Mm-hmm.
be things that you've got in your schedule and your habits that are filling your cup to the brim. So, because it's going to leak every so often, right?
Mm-hmm.
So things like salah, like the Quran tells us, "Tanha anil fahsha'i wal munkar." When you pray, it's kind of like a bubble. It's like a force field, right? It protects you from those things, and it's something that we don't fully understand because it's something of the unseen, but it's true. And even all these new age science things, people like, I got my yoga practice, I got my mindfulness practice in the
Mm-hmm.
morning, all this stuff, which is really great stuff. But we have salah. We
Yep.
have salah, and in the most amazing times of the day, those, when the sun comes up, when the sun goes down, it really
Mm-hmm.
connects us with the creator, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so keeping your salat as a part of your daily practice is really important because it gives you that reservoir of spirituality that you need to combat those things. I would say that's one part of filling your cup. Another part is really having your support system of friends that, even if they're not there in the moment, they're there to fill you with the right ideas and the right, I guess, kind of direction in terms of filling you with something. You know what your compass, where your compass is supposed to be pointing before you even get there. Before
Mm-hmm.
you even get there, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So you're gonna have your support with that, which includes friends and mentors. You're gonna have your relationship with Allah and the daily practices that you have with your relationship with Allah. And then I would say think ahead of what might happen and practice. Sometimes I do that with some of my clients. I'm like, all right, tell me what the scene looks like and let's practice.
Mm-hmm.
Let's and it doesn't, you don't need a therapist to do that. You can run the conversation in your mind and anticipate, what is it that I can do, or what is it that I can, what is it that I can say in that
Mm-hmm.
particular situation. And then of course, dua, really asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for guidance and help in doing those particular things. The last thing I would say is, if this is the only social scene or environment that you have in your life, then that's an issue. Because as like we mentioned earlier,
Mm-hmm.
we need those social environments. We need to connect with other
Mm-hmm.
human beings. If you don't have other places that are healthier and not so risky, then you're going to end up going to these, spaces all the time, because as human beings, we need to be social and we need to feel like we're a part of a community. So fill your days, fill your times with other things that you enjoy that would fill your cup in other ways.
That's very interesting. Having so would you say it's safe to for each activity you should have like a group per se? Like, how
I
many
mean,
activities in groups would you say? Or let's
your
not
voice
make it a
got cut
number,
off for
but
a second.
just breaking that down a little more.
I can't hear you.
Hello,
All right, I
you
can
hear
hear
me?
you now. Yeah.
Oh, no, I was saying like so. Does that look like taking each activity that you like to do and making a group for it of people that you socialize with, or what does that look like exactly?
You can, or even if it's things it's important to also be introspective and do some solo activities too. So go for a run in the morning if that's your thing, right? For some people, it's doing art. So for some people, it's playing a team sport. It really, really, you have to kind of sit with yourself and figure out what is it that you enjoy, you truly feel passionate about, and it just makes you feel uplifting. And the thing is, when we talk about even connecting with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it doesn't necessarily have to be just salah, right? Because sometimes people are like, I don't feel it. I'm praying and I don't feel it, right? One of the best
Mhm.
ways to connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and even with yourself is to go out in nature. And you don't have to be doing something specific. You could go for a hike. You could just sit down and look at the sky. You could listen to the water when it's raining, listen to the raindrops. I mean, whatever you enjoy, and try to figure out all your five senses. What do you like to smell? What do you like to hear? What do you like to feel? That's a really great way to connect with this higher power, but also to practice being introspective with yourself, to really hear your thoughts and your thought pattern, and what is it that's going on in your mind. It gives you a sense of um, of calmness and peace to really hear what you have to say without the noise.
Mm. So, the next part I want to talk about is
Hmm.
uh, alcohol and drugs. So I know, like I said before in the beginning of the podcast, you work for FYI, Family and Youth Institute, and you guys, I
Hmm.
seen on your page, you guys had some study you did, mashallah, that was conducted when, or the flot banner looked like it was 2015, but I'm sure you guys have done research since then. Do you have some statistics on Muslim youth in their college usage of alcohol and drugs?
Yeah, actually, that 2014 study that you were talking about, there's an infographic on the FYI website. So, young people, I mean, comparatively speaking to non-Muslims, they engage in premarital sex around 76%. But for Muslims, we're talking about in the 50 mark, the 57%, for males, 48% for females, especially for it's also for non-Muslims. When we're talking about alcohol, we're at the 63%, but for Muslims, we're at 45%.
Wow.
And so that's a
Wow.
that's a pretty, a lot of people, 47% of Muslims consuming alcohol. That's a lot of people. That surprises them. But that's when they experiment, and our young people are dealing with that. And like you mentioned earlier, there's a lot of shame associated with some of those um, experiences. Even those who identify as quote unquote religious are engaging in alcohol use.
Hmm. Very
Mhm.
interesting. Now, what, like when this study was done, was it like just on like college campuses and you guys asked people to randomly take an anonymous survey, or how was the study conducted?
I'm not sure. You'd have to kind of look on the FYI website itself. I'm not the one who's done the research, but I know that they did a
Mhm.
lot of extensive work. Dr. Samita Ahmed was a big part of
Mhm.
that research project. So, but it is available under that the FYI.org, underneath that particular infographic with the alcohol and drug use for young Muslims.
Now, with the alcohol and the drug usage, a lot of that is sometimes it's to numb something, right? Sometimes it's to
Mhm.
partake in something. Sometimes it becomes a crutch for people. Now, through your counseling and your therapy you've done with college students, what are some of the reasons people have
Mhm.
told you they've resulted to turning to alcohol and drugs?
Loneliness, feeling
Mm,
empty, anxiety. It's filling a void. There's a book, trying to remember who the author is, but I think it's called The Opposite of Addiction is Connection. I think that's what it's called. I can't remember the name of the
mhm,
author. But that's in essence what it is that when people get really, addicted to this, it's often in the absence of human connection. And I can't say for sure that that's everybody,
mm,
um, because sometimes it runs in families. But
mm.
but oftentimes, a lot of the young people, it's filling some kind of a void, and that goes back to our conversation on relationships again, right? Whether it's a
Mm.
relationship with Allah Subhanahu wa Taala or relationships with humans.
Wow. It's subhanallah. The loneliness factor just it kind of made me lonely hearing that. It's like wow, because it's true. I think
and
in us.
and that's the thing, like when we talk about I don't know if I'm talking over you
No, go
because
ahead, go
you
ahead,
cut
go
off
ahead.
for a second. That's the thing is, it's not just the relationships that we have with other people, but the relationship that we have with our own selves. So sometimes a lot of us feel a lot of self-loathing, like we don't feel like we're worthy of happiness. We don't feel like we're worthy of love. We don't feel like we're worthy of excelling in our careers, whatever it is, right? Sometimes we don't even think we're worthy of being good Muslims, right? Or really connecting with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We don't deserve it, right? And that could be as a result of messaging that we received as children or whatever environment that we were in. There's also a personality factor. Some of us see things in a better light than others, and we have to work on ourselves a little harder. Um, but I think oftentimes that's a very painful feeling to have, not feeling worthy of love and happiness. And sometimes people kind of go in that direction to kind of medicate that, to feel a little better. And it might not have started that way. It could have been a social thing too. Like the social scene in college is often related to drugs and alcohol. So sometimes it was just, let me just try this. Let me see how it is because I want to be a part of this group and I want to be a part of a community. And then it kind of just goes in that direction because it's just a part of what the community looks like and feels like in order to be in this tribe.
And it makes me think about what we were talking about earlier about telling somebody if you love them, the loneliness factor, and two things. I thought about this story. One of my sheikhs was telling me it was about a guy. I don't know if he was Muslim or not, but it was sad because the
Mhm.
guy he killed himself or he attempted to kill himself. I think he killed himself, and he
Mhm.
wrote in the letter, "If somebody, all I wanted was somebody to tell me that they loved me. That's it.
Yeah.
If somebody had just
Yeah.
done that, then I would have just like none of this would have happened, right?" And as you think of the college scene and the society we live in, things are very. It's become more. It's kind of dog eat dog, right? Like the world was always dog eat dog, at least what people say that terminology. But it's very rough. It's what do you have? Who are you? And respect is earned, not given, right? Which is completely opposite of the Islamic paradigm, right? Right? Like,
Yeah.
what's that? وَلَقَدْ خَرَمْنَا بَنِي Adam, right? Like everybody
Mhm.
has this like respect, but
Mhm.
until you do something to where I stay away from you, I'm not gonna disrespect you, right? We give everybody that proper courtesy, right? But it seems in our society things have become more dry and heartless. Why do you think that is? Why do you think things have become very, you know, the way it is, really? Lack of love, lack of empathy, lack of care, lack of
It's
sincerity.
it's strange. Like we live in an increasingly digital world, so we're technically supposed to be more connected.
Hmm.
But it feels like we're not. Like it feels like even with all the social media and all the different methods to connect with people, it's we're not in each other's true spaces. It's almost performative. A lot of the times it's performative. I'm not saying all the time, and I'm not trying to bash social media, but like a lot of it is. And so we always feel like we have to be on performance mode. Like, and
Hmm.
we talked about this earlier. We have to we can't just be ourselves. And I was talking earlier about this heart talk. How many times we say someone will ask us, how are you? And the typical answer is fine. And you're not fine. Deep down inside, you're totally not fine. But that's the generic answer that we have to tell everyone. And it just doesn't feel real. And so people have learned to put on that mask and be unreal and not really have the real heart conversations. Um, and I think we've forgotten also how to draw important boundaries too. Like it's yes, and it's always a balance. That's why Islam is the middle path. We try to live the middle path. Yes, it's important to have those heart to heart conversations, but also You have to create the boundaries where you know that you're going in a direction that is unhealthy for you or for your own sanity and your own mental health. There's a really great book. Nedra Tawwab, I think, is the author. She talks a lot about setting boundaries, because I think we that's a skill that a lot of us haven't learned and haven't really mastered, in terms of, like you said, I don't drink. Sometimes we're afraid to draw that boundary line,
Mm-hmm.
even though there's so many people that don't drink, not for Islamic purposes or religious purposes. They just, maybe they know that they're prone to addiction. Maybe it runs in their family and there's too much trauma related to drinking. There's so many reasons why someone might not drink, and it's okay for someone to draw that boundary line. But for some reason, when we think about it from an Islamic perspective, it's taboo and it's wrong to draw that boundary line. Right now, it's
Mm-hmm.
embarrassing to draw that boundary line, right? But going back to your original question of why is it that way, I I think we haven't given ourselves the opportunity and the time and the space to really truly get to know one another on a deeper level. It's just quick move from one thing to another, one event to another. Even when we talk about youth programming at the masjid or in our Muslim spaces, something that really gets to me is we have so many Muslim spaces where there's so much programming, meaning, like, let's go to a picnic this weekend, and then we're going to go to bowling the next weekend, and then we're going to, I don't know, like, go for a hike and do all these things. And it's just one event after another, like dinner, bowling. But then there really isn't anything incorporated into this programming of, do you actually know the people that you're bowling with or you're hiking
Mm-hmm.
with or that you're going on this outing with? Are you giving people the opportunity to really have these deep, solid, meaningful relationships, and not just relationships with each other in the same age group, but intergenerational relationships?
Yeah.
For a young person to sit with a senior and really acquire some of their knowledge and experience and understanding of the world and their wisdom is really important. And for the older people to really to really see the perspective of young people, what they're living, what they're going through in a digital age is very different. And for them to have those conversations, I don't think we really provide that in in many spaces.
You know,
And it's missing.
that thing, that point that you hit really it hits deep for me in the sense of a particular moment I think about that always gets me is Ramadan, right? Ramadan is like the best time for those periods where you really connect with people, right? Like a lot of the
Hmm.
brothers from the masjid, we've done other things together, but some of our deep memories we have are the Ramadans we spent together. Oh, you remember we played
Yeah.
basketball that one time? Yeah, you remember one time the Sheikh led and he read Baqarah and it was like the longest time. Yeah, well, I almost fell. Like those moments of like when you were there and you guys talked and you guys shared those moments, you guys just, how's everything going? And you just, it's Ramadan, you don't eat, so your spirituality is higher, you're more open, you're friendlier, and you share, and you're more receptive. I think that's the other thing, right? You're more receptive to wanting to hear and you're a better listener, which is something I think that is super underrated because, a lot of the times, especially with us young people, right? When we talk to one another, it's kind of like, okay, hurry up and say what you want to say so I can like go do what I want to
Hmm.
do. But it's like the
Hmm.
skill of really listening to somebody isn't like really eminent. It's not there, right? So it's like,
Yeah.
okay, but if you really were to sit and listen to what this person's actually telling you, you might find value, or it might be maybe not now, but maybe later. It'll be something that you could find as something that can really benefit you, or something you could
Yeah.
use to benefit somebody else or help them.
Yeah, yeah, and the Prophet Muhammad SAW was the best example of that. When people would be missing from a battlefield, like if you think about a battlefield, like Ka'b ibn Malik, he was missing from the battlefield. You're talking about hundreds of soldiers. Like, why would you pay attention to who's missing? But the
Hmm.
Prophet SAW, he paid attention. He says, "Where's Ka'b?" He notices when people are missing. The companions would ask Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anhu. He was very quick to, tears were very quick coming to his eyes when he would hear verses of the Quran. And the companions would inquire why he was crying, not because don't dare, don't cry, but
Hmm.
we want to know why you're crying so we can cry next to you, we can cry with you, right?
Mm.
And so the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and we hear the story so many times, the young boy who lost his pet bird, who passed,
Yeah.
the pet bird passed away, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, pet him and asked him about his bird. He didn't have to do that. But those are the connections, those little things that really matter and count, right?
Mm.
And I think when we're going into this college scene as young people, we have to be able to say who are the people that I can have those relationships,
Mm.
or where are the spaces that I can look for to create those relationships. And I think part of the responsibility of that is on us as parents and caregivers and mentors and chaplains. And it it's important for us to create those spaces for young people, because it's hard enough as it is in their environment, and at least we can open up those environments so that they can find that type of mentorship and relationship.
And speaking of relationship, great segue. Now, of course, this is a very underrated aspect of the college experience, but interacting with the opposite gender, of course, I couldn't leave that out, right? What are some, uh, I'm sure you hear your fair share of grievances. What are some grievances you hear about interacting with the opposite gender in terms of like college people?
Uh, so I guess there's a spectrum. There's a spectrum. There's the kinds of Muslims where, before the college scene, they weren't ever allowed to talk to the opposite gender. So here we go again. We're opening up that door, and it just feels like either they have no idea what to do, or they're like, let's try everything, right? And
Mm-hmm.
then there's no boundaries. There's no Islamic framework, because they've never really had those conversations or
Mm-hmm.
the opportunity to practice what it looks like to be appropriate with the opposite gender, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, you also have people who are so afraid to speak to the opposite gender because of that, previous experience, that they're super strict, and and that's a grievance that a lot of women have, actually, that the dude is Muslim, he didn't even say salams to me, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
um but he'll say whatever to the non-Muslim girl that's walking down the street, right? So
Mm-hmm.
so this idea of brotherhood and sisterhood is kind of thwarted. It's warped. I don't know what a better
Mm-hmm.
word to use. It's warped. It's either we can't ever talk to each other ever, or we're crossing boundary lines. And we forget that we are the middle path. That the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam didn't teach us this way. We are still brothers and sisters in Islam. We still care about one another. So giving salam, there isn't a restriction that says don't give salams to your sister or your brother. So I think that's probably the biggest thing, because a lot of young people are still trying to figure out or navigate how to go about it, how to do it, especially during that stage of their life. They're looking for intimacy.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes they're confused. Okay, well, how do I actually find my person if there's
Mm-hmm.
all these rules and restrictions in terms of interacting with the opposite gender, and I don't know what's right or what's wrong? Going back to mentorship again, we need mentorship to really have those conversations.
One thing I definitely say, and it seems to be a common theme amongst Muslims in our time period, right? I've had brothers older than me, right, who've come and said, "How do I talk to Muslim women? Like, how do I go about this? What's the framework? How?" Right? Because it's just like this awkwardness between the two sides. It's kind of like, okay, do you say salam? Do you not? And I can only imagine being younger after leaving. Let's say you went to Islamic school your whole life, and then it's like, oh, I'm supposed to graduate. And after I graduate, more than likely, they're going to want me to get married. But in
Mhm.
terms of finding the person, all right, how do I go about that? How do I talk to this person? Right. And then you never talk to these people. But then let's say you did or you didn't go to Islamic school, right? Talking to the non-Muslim, whoever she may be or whoever he may be, is like 50
Mhm.
times easier, right? Because you've just had more experience. Whether you go to the grocery store, whether you work on a project with somebody, whether teachers walking down the street, like we're surrounded by more non-Muslims than we are Muslims, right? Because we stay in a non-Muslim
Hmm.
country. And then you have that experience interacting with them. So then okay, like I know where to go, where not to go. I feel like that really does create more of an issue in terms of the two interacting because it could create some maybe potentially some resentment, right, on the side of either side. Oh, why do you talk to that person? Why are they talking with them, but they don't say anything to me, right?
I think there's a judgment piece too. Like, what is
Mhm.
this person going to say about how I interact with them, or do? And it's again, it's
Mhm.
based on our Muslim, unfortunately, Muslim community's environment. We haven't really given young people a way to figure out how to do courtship. They
Mhm.
have it takes practice. It takes practice and it takes a little bit of maturity. Because we talked a little bit about this shift. I noticed this shift with young Muslims is them figuring themselves out. Even the courtship piece is kind of shifted because they were never really given the opportunity to experiment in a halal way.
Mhm.
Like,
Mhm.
um, not completely separating the genders so that they can interact with one another, right? L-
Mhm.
Giving them projects to work on together so that they learn how to have that, gender interaction is really important.
I've always had a theory, and I was talking with a brother of mine a couple of years ago. I want to say like 4 years. We were talking about this theory, and as to
Hmm.
why we see some sisters have a inclination to other groups in particular, like the LGBTQ community, right? Because they
Hmm.
stand up for them, they're there. Whereas
Hmm.
because of the
Hmm.
awkward dynamics and relationships that's between Muslim brothers and sisters, it's like
Yeah.
sisters may feel neglected by brothers. So if it's an issue, they don't feel like, oh, let me go tell this group of Muslim boys over here, hey, this just happened to me. This guy just disrespected me, or I don't feel safe. Can you walk me to my car? Like, we don't have
Yeah.
that, right? To where like
Yeah.
a brother can see a sister. And even on the opposite side, I've been on the opposite side too, where I've said salams to sisters and they've just looked at me and walked away, right? And you're just
Oh
like, well,
yeah. Both
you know,
ways. Yeah.
you don't mean anything harmful or anything malicious. You just, hey, salam alaikum. It's what we do as Muslims, right? And where we can create that sense, that dynamic. Because ideally, right, we want that environment to where it's like, sister, wherever you are. Let's say I just met you for the first time. I see you. Salam alaikum. Oh, you Muslim? Alaikum salam. Hey, I'm here. Hey, if you need anything, we're over here. Me and these brothers, whatever. Salam alaikum. Right? That's it. Just
Yeah.
keep it as simple as that.
Yeah.
And then you have a sense of relief in terms of doing whatever you do because you have some type of person there. Going back to that point of what having like a group thing, right? I think that's definitely something that we need to definitely fix.
I think in general too. I mean, as Muslims live in this society and are going to be influenced by the culture of this society.
Hmm.
No matter what we do, we hope to have a little bit of a different twist on things, but we're going to be influenced. And I think in the general mainstream society, there seems to be like this animosity between men and women, like we're enemies or something.
Yeah.
Like, like
Hmm.
are you, and I think this goes back to being a stranger, is that why do you have to choose sides, right? We complement one
Hmm.
another. We're not fighting, men are not our enemy, women aren't our enemy, we're not trying to compete necessarily with each other or fight against each other, we work
Hmm.
together as a team. And I think that's a concept that those conversations need to happen, because I think there's a little bit of confusion in young people in terms of what our roles are as women or men, particularly in a Muslim society. And I think this is a dilemma that young people face often, is they feel like all of these labels and groups that people have come up with, we don't really fit in any of them. Like, you go into the college scene and it's like I'm just using that word lightly, but
Yeah.
quote unquote liberals, right?
Hmm.
Like, yeah, they're welcoming and it's diverse and we love Muslims and all this stuff, but there's a part of their value system that we just don't get along. It doesn't fit with us.
And say
And
something
we
against that value system and watch what happens.
Yeah, exactly. And they're like, nope, you're not with us. You're not a part of us, right? Then you go to the conservative side, because I'm using the term lightly, conservative side, and it's like, okay, maybe we align with some of the value systems, but then when it comes to like racism and diversity, and we don't get along, we it just doesn't fit. And so I think young people come to this understanding is, I don't think I'm going to fit in any of these groups.
Mm.
I'm just, and really coming to terms with this idea that like what the Prophet ﷺ said, glad tidings to the stranger. You're going to be a stranger until you die. And you just have to own it. You have to own being a stranger. And it's okay. If everybody else in this college scene can be a weirdo and own their weirdness, then so can you, you know?
That's a great point. I was just gonna ask that, owning your weirdness, and owning whatever
That's kind of a
awkwardness
weird.
that may be, right? Like, no,
Yeah.
definitely. I think though the people who are the freest in society are those who do accept that and own up to that, right? Like, I like
Hmm.
this thing, right? What is that? Oh, that's weird. You like that? What? You like this Muslim thing?
Hmm.
But the thing about people
Hmm.
that is always hilarious, right? Whenever you do like something like that and you own up to it and they see you're comfortable, it does one of two things. It makes them uncomfortable or it makes people want to do that thing that you're doing every single
Absolutely.
time. Every single time. They're
Absolutely.
like, ah, wait, you're Muslim? How can he be Muslim? And how is she wearing the hijab and she like likes to cover and all that stuff? Because they're like, I could
And
never
I
do
think
that.
and I think that's the confidence. I'd hope that young people, we want them to reach that level of confidence in their identity as Muslims, right?
Mm,
It's not this idea that life is never going to be difficult, or you're not going to ever feel uncomfortable. There's always going to be curveballs in life. There's always going to be something that you're going to be dealing with. But this is where the concept of where the Prophet ﷺ, he teaches us, and the Islamic tradition teaches us that the believer is always a winner. The believer
mm,
is always victorious,
mm,
because if something bad comes their way, they're patient with it and they're going to get rewarded for it, and they keep going. And if there's something great that comes in their way, they're grateful and they're content and they still keep going, right? And
mm.
so for us to keep honing in on that and practicing that over and over and over again, it makes you strong and confident. And then people look at you and they're like, there's something that you have. There's this vibe that you have that I
Uh-huh, uh-huh,
want,
uh-huh.
right? I want that. I want that confidence. I want that sakina, that peace. And sometimes people can't pinpoint it. They can't figure out exactly what it is, but it feels amazing and
Mm.
people notice it.
No, people definitely notice it. Like you said, they feel it and they want it, but they, like you said, sometimes they just can't. Maybe it's something Allah Subhanahu wa Taala does to like hide it so they don't like take it from us or they don't disrupt it. But sometimes they can't
Hmm.
pinpoint it, and sometimes those who they're able to, they're like either they adopt some practices that you have or they just adopt everything altogether, right? Like a lot of people have become Muslim because of the way people just conduct themselves, right? And college is a
Yeah.
great ground for that because what we're saying doesn't just apply to just Muslims that are like Muslim youth. It applies to all across the board, right? Because if you
Oh,
look at
yeah.
public schools, right, like it's people don't really know who they are. They get to college, they experiment, and because they don't have like a Sharia, like they don't have some fiqh type of a working background, they go even deeper into the deep end, right? Like these people go all the way. But the thing I will say I do like and I can admire like about some is there's sincerity in the sense of when they go all the way, some will say, yeah, I went all the way, but this isn't it. Like this wasn't the thing to do. Stay away from this. And they're honest about it, right? Whereas I feel
Yeah.
like we
Yeah.
as Muslims, we'll be honest or sometimes we won't be honest about it really. We kind of
Hmm.
just like,
Hmm.
we halfway,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
one foot in, one foot out type of situation.
And I think also sometimes people assume, or they think that in order to be like a practicing Muslim, we have to let go of everything, everything
Hmm.
about a personality, and be like, we all have to be robots and be
Mm.
exactly the same when it comes to practicing Islam. But the Prophet ﷺ taught us otherwise. Like he says, خيركم في الجاهلية خيركم في Islam. The best of you during
Hmm.
the Jahiliyyah times,
Messages.
that same personality trait that made you amazing or made you like, unique and distinct, that same thing you can use it in your Islam, right? From the outset, if you look at Umar ibn al-Khattab, you would never think, you would never, it would never cross your mind like, oh, a drunkard, right?
Mm-hmm.
Would become, but the Prophet ﷺ saw something valuable in him, and he made dua that one of the Umars would become a Muslim, because
Mm-hmm.
he knew that this strength and this conviction, and we were talking about substance use a while back.
Yeah.
He
Mm-hmm.
there was something that was bothering him. There was something that was bothering him about those Jahiliyyah times, and he didn't like it. He wasn't happy with how things were done. And if we put an X on Umar ibn al-Khattab and said, "Hey, you know, he's not worth our time," right? But that's the thing. The Prophet ﷺ was able to see the good in people
Mm-hmm.
and based everybody off of the personality. Abu Bakr isn't like Umar, but they're
Mm-hmm.
both great companions,
Mm-hmm.
right? They're both great companions, right? So it's seeing the good in people, or seeing the good in ourselves and the qualities that we have that are powerful and strong and distinct, and using those qualities and talents and skills to show Islam and to practice Islam and to be a part of that, right? And like we mentioned earlier, sometimes we don't even know that when we're doing something is
Mm-hmm.
influential and powerful until someone points it out.
Yeah.
When I was in college, I used to ride this shuttle bus, to take the metro.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to say my idhkar, like, my dhikr.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I'm whispering it, I'm moving my mouth. And I get off the bus, and this woman, this young woman stops me, and she says, "I saw you moving your lips. What were you,
Mm-hmm.
I noticed you were saying something. What were you doing?" And I just have to say, you looked at peace. So I want to know what you were doing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't thinking, "Oh, here, let me sit down and say my adhkar so people can watch me, and it's a
Mm-hmm.
da'wah thing and all that stuff."
Mm-hmm.
It didn't cross my mind. But people are watching. People see, people feel. And I think that's a very big part of this issue, that when we go back to this issue of personal relationships, is we in order for us to grow and heal and become strong as human beings, we need to be in each other's faces and spaces, right? That woman needed to see me and feel me and see what the difference was from the dhikr. And I didn't know, but I did something, you
Yeah,
know?
mashallah. And it was, I think it was Imam Amin Muhammad who was mentioning. He said, a lot of us, because he's a convert, and he said a lot of us when we
Mhm.
convert to Islam, we get lazy. You know, we become lazy. We
Mhm.
used to be somebody who in the Jahiliyyah we knew how to get money all types of ways. We knew how to do this, plan, business,
Mhm.
exercise,
Mhm.
everything. When we got to Deen,
Yeah.
we become just lazy. We become like we don't know how to do anything. But he's like exactly what you're saying, right? The best of you in Jahiliyyah is you can bring those same qualities to Islam. I
Mhm.
think that's a valuable lesson to share to young people and older people, everybody in general, right? You should never write
Mhm.
yourself off, right? Because think of
Mhm.
If Umar Khattab wrote himself off, right? How many people wouldn't have became Muslim, or where Islam wouldn't have spread to? Think of all the places that under his
Yeah.
when he was Khalifa that became Muslim, right? And just think
Mhm.
about it. The day he became Muslim was the day he said he was going to kill the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right?
Yeah,
Like,
subhanallah.
think about after he became Muslim, if he was just like, oh my goodness, I said I was going to kill the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I can never do
Yeah.
anything good. I just have
Yeah.
to live in this under this rock. But he
Yeah.
didn't, right? He moved forward and did his best to help the spread the risala, right? Spread this message and help spread Islam. I think that's something
Yeah.
really powerful to share with people.
And his nickname, Al Faruq, the one who divides between the truth and falsehood, right?
Hmm.
That was there from the very beginning. That's why he
Mm,
was not content. He was like,
mm,
what you all are doing is just wrong, and I feel it. It's wrong, because there was this drive in him. And he took that drive when he became Muslim, and that's what made him Al Faruq, right? And so I think that's a very important practice that young people need to do is look, be introspective, look inward. What are you good at?
mhm,
What are you passionate about? What do you really want people to know or learn, and go with it, you
mhm.
know?
I think that also, to add to that, also, right? sometimes we may feel this inferiority complex, like, oh, I went to a Muslim school and I'm here at this with these
Mhm.
non-Muslims. Let me not do that. But no, the same way Umar Khattab took that energy when he became
Mhm.
Muslim, like, oh, why are we praying in secret? Why are we doing, like, why do we have this message? Are we not the ability, right? Like taking that
Yeah.
same thing. So those same principles that you may have in your community that you exercise and you do, you're great at organizing, leading, and doing stuff in your community. Take that with you to school and showcase that, right? Exactly to add to your point of those skills and who you are and what you bring. Don't hide that or don't put it to the side. Bring that out and showcase that.
Yeah. And and I don't want to belittle, because sometimes when we keep going in this direction, people
Mhm.
who are really dealing with deep mental health issues, or maybe they've had trauma in their life, sometimes it's hard to pick the pieces up. Sometimes, and I can tell you from my experience on the job with my clients, is sometimes you reach a point where it's a pretty deep low, right?
Mhm.
And you need someone to help pull you out, because sometimes people play the card of, well, you got to pray more,
Yeah.
or just motivate yourself, do your dhikr, or like, just pull yourself by the bootstraps, and if
Mhm.
you think about it and you do it, then you'll be fine, right?
Mhm.
But especially for people who have gone through trauma, or they've gone through an experience in their life where they're in a really deep rut,
Mhm.
it's okay to ask for help. It's totally okay to ask for help. Go seek therapy. Go, seek the people that have the expertise to help pull you up a little bit, so that you can climb up that hole. And I want to make sure that I mention that, because sometimes people feel like, okay, well, I can't do that. I'm too deep into it.
Mhm.
But there are resources and there are people that can help you with that and pull yourself out of that rut.
And let me add to that as well, right? We don't want people to feel like that because it can be overwhelming. I've been to that point myself personally. I think the one
Yeah.
thing I would advise people is if you are at that point, to the biggest thing that I love about Islam and I love about like the perspective that it gives you on life is at all you're supposed to do is make the effort. Even if it's 1%, you make the effort. That's it. If it's nothing
Yeah.
else, if you know this is the biggest problem you have in your life, I would say put everything else to the side as best as you can, and you focus at least your 1% to try to fix this issue consistently every day. Even if you fail, you try. Even if it's 1%, you consistently try, right? Because if you try, you pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will definitely grant you tawfiq in your situation, right? Some type
Mhm.
of opening or something that can happen, right? As
Mhm.
long as you
Mhm.
just try, right? Of course, like I know it's tough, but you do have to make the effort, right? Because only you
Mhm.
can make the effort at that point in terms of your own personal circumstances sometimes, right? You have to take some initiative, you know.
Yeah, and we have examples like the story of Maryam, alayha salam. Like when we think of her, when you read in the Quran how she felt, she felt like she wanted to die. That's
Mhm.
suicidal ideation, right? Like it's so shameful. The situation is so shameful for her, right? And she's in
Mhm.
so much pain when she's giving birth to Isa alayhi salam. But what did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tell her to do? He told her to shake the palm tree, right? Like
Mhm.
you don't fall in your despair. You take that one step, even if it's a small one. And when you think about a palm tree, it's not like you can actually shake it.
No,
It's
exactly.
it's it's hard. You
Yeah,
can't. You can't.
yeah.
But it's the concept. It's the
Mhm.
concept that you have to do something. You have to do something. Take that one step. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ana inda dhanna abdi bi. I am as my servant thinks I am. If you come to me walking, I come to you running. You just take that one step, right? And even when I'm dealing with my clients, I always tell them, baby steps.
Mhm.
Baby steps. You can't get out of bed? See if you can just put your slippers on. You
Yeah,
can't, move from the bed. Just brush your teeth.
yeah.
Just do the little tiny things. And when you add those little tiny things, it adds up until you can do the thing that you need to do.
Yeah, definitely doing those little things consistently, like you're saying, just consistently. Because what I've realized, and you know this better than me because you're a therapist, right? Is the mind works on these habits, right? But if you haven't created
Mhm.
this habit, you know, you'll procrastinate. but that's kind of like your brain telling you, I'm not really ready to do this, or I don't really want to do this, right? But like you said,
Yeah.
if you consistently are able to do this thing, when it's time to do the next thing, it'll be a little easier because you've already created that motion, that circuitry has been made inside of your mind to move forward. And I think that's something, just doing things little, before we wrap things up, please, can you talk about the importance of doing things as doable as possible, like minute actions and the impact that they have?
Yeah. So I think it's really important that each of us, especially young people going to college or in college, create a personal development plan for themselves, you know? And y- you need to write things down. You need to record them, because then they get lost in your mind. And there's a magical power. I'm using the word magical, but it's tawfiq, like you said. When you
Mm-hmm.
write things down, you're committing your brain to doing it. Your brain says, okay, I'm gonna try my best to fulfill this thing because you put it down on paper.
Mm-hmm.
And you're not just putting it down on paper, you're asking, while you're writing it down, you're asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help you reach that goal.
Mm-hmm.
And track it. There's all these apps, habit tracker, daily bean, all these apps that you could do. Maybe you could get a buddy or a group, like we have Usra and Mass, for example, someone that can be your personal accountability, that can be, hey, did you pray Fajr today? Did you pray Fajr on time? Did you work out? You said you were going to work out every day and take care of your body. Did you take care of your body? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave you your body as an amana. It's your responsibility to really take care of your body. Are you doing that? And so people who can hold you accountable, but for you to also write it down and check in and keep track of those things so you see what your progress is.
And then adding to that, can you talk briefly about
Mhm.
what it looks like to find a mentor and how to select one and include that as a part of the plan?
Well, yeah, I think that's one of the biggest challenges because I almost every conversation that we've had, it goes back to mentorship. And I really think that's probably one of the biggest challenges we have as a community, as a ummah, at least here in the United States. It's a huge thing. And I think the issue is we've forgotten how to have intergenerational relationships, especially in the masjid scene. It's almost like the young people are like, those are the old school people. We don't need to hear it from them. They don't know what it's like to live our life nowadays, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the older people are like, these young people, they don't know what it's like to live hard, and everybody has their own kind of ideas about how they should be living life, and then they're not listening to each other, right? I
Mm-hmm.
think to take a step back, our community spaces need to create opportunities where we're actually talking to each other and connecting with each other. I saw this one church, it was in an article. One church, once a week, they have a dinner, and you can't sit at a table where there's people your age. Every table has to
Mm-hmm.
have one of each, and they have to
Mm-hmm.
eat together and they have to have a conversation together, right?
Wow.
And we've we've initially, I mean, normally we're supposed to have communal spaces where we're drinking tea together, we're hanging out
Mm-hmm.
together, the community barbecue where people are just talking to each other. I think that's the first, like, preventative step, is create the spaces where we can find the mentorship.
Mm-hmm.
And then in terms of mentorship, looking for the people who are active listeners, who know how to hold space, who can hold you accountable. Because sometimes people, they're like, okay, I want someone who's going to give me, love and affection, and that's it, period. No, a good friend and a good mentor is two parts. They give you the love and the affirmations, but they also hold you accountable, and they make sure that you're getting better and you're improving yourself. So, in those spaces, finding the people that have that Islamic framework, hopefully, that can really connect with you and hold you accountable and give you that love.
What I like to say, Barakallah Fik, Sis Dua, thank
Jazakumullah
you
khairan.
very much. This was a wonderful talk to speak on. And just to, summarize, it seems to be that anxiety and loneliness and self-discovery are all themes that should be addressed before, well, self-discovery mainly should be addressed before really getting on that path in college, and while in college, really taking a healthy and proper way of doing that. We live in a society now where it's almost you do it exact whatever you want to do, right? But I
Hmm.
think what is best is realizing that as a Muslim we have bounds, but it's not bounds because Allah Subhanahu wa Taala wants to be mean or He wants to punish you, but it's to protect you, right? Protect you from this dunya, right? Because this dunya isn't Jannah, right? We're not in the Firdaus to where there's no repercussions for things that we do, right? There are repercussions, and there are people who don't want to see us do good or see you do good, right? We have the shaitan and those who are akin with him that are trying to derail us from the ultimate goal and task. So definitely keeping that in mind and being in that bound of experimenting and seeing, right? Because there is a way to develop as a Muslim, right? That you can develop in a way that's very healthy, it's productive, it's powerful, right? It's transformative. And then it's something that you can use and take to the next generation to help them as well, or help the older generation as well, right? Because, we have to be good to our older people as well. Um, Anxiety
I
seems to
think
be
that,
something that really plagues us.
yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead. You want to add something? No, go ahead.
I think that's the maturity that we want
Hmm.
people to achieve, is this idea that dunya is never going to be perfect and amazing, right?
Hmm.
We're supposed to live in this life as a traveler.
Hmm.
And so no matter what you do, there's always going to be bumps. And like you said, there's always going to be bumps, and you're going to have to, that there's a plan, there's an ultimate plan. And then you realize, all right, I better be working for my akhirah,
Yeah,
because it's not worth it. It's not worth it, because it's not going to, all those bumps are not going to end.
and, the biggest bumps that seem to hit us seems to be the anxiety and the loneliness or the bad influences and these many things that come in different shapes and forms. But definitely anchoring yourself to a plan and having a schedule and having good healthy habits, and definitely having salah be the tying anchor to all of it, right, can help you navigate such a turbulent time that derails a lot of people. A lot of people's lives definitely change after college here in the United States, for better or for worse. And it's just something that we have to learn how to navigate as Muslims inside of the United States. So I like to thank Sis Dua for coming on. Is definitely appreciated. Revive Pack is coming out talking about college. The next episode we're going to be discussing in college as well. More panel style. We're going to have some more people on talk about their personal experiences. Sis Dua, thank you once again. Is there anything you want to shout out before we end the episode?
Jazakumullah khairan. Thank you for the opportunity. It's been an honor. Jazakallah khairan.
Well, Yakum, thank you for the deep talk. She said she wanted a deep talk. I hope it was deep enough. I hope it was real enough. I like those talks as well, mashallah. All
Alhamdulillah.
right, guys.
Alhamdulillah.
Thank you for listening to Remastered. Please share the episode with your friends. Please check out Muslim American Society today. Wonderful organization doing great things. I'll see you all later, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.